Hi everyone, Christina Werner here. Welcome to another video for SimonSstamp.com. Today I'm going to be showing you 4 different ways to use the Outline Floral Mom craft die that was just released a few weeks ago. For 2 of the cards, I'll be creating very easy watercolor backgrounds using Nouveau shimmer powders. And then for the other 2, I'm first going to create a simple shaker card, and then I'm going to modify the die and create a really clean and simple card design. So this is the Outline Floral Mom die, and it's nice and big. It's sized perfectly for an A2 card. So you could use this die all by itself and it creates a beautiful card. I'm going to be creating 2 cards, both with the watercolor backgrounds, and they both have the die cut using gold foil cardstock. So I'm going to be cutting this gold foil cardstock with my die cutting machine. I'm going to run it through, and I'm actually going to run this through 3 times because this gold foil cardstock is rather thick, and I want to make sure I get a really clean cut. So I'm running it through 3 times. After I have everything cut, I'm going to punch out all the little pieces of the flowers that are around the outside of the mom. And I'm going to be using a Tim Holtz craft pick for that. This is a great tool to have when you're using intricate dies, especially when you need to punch out the papers that are left inside the die. You want to make sure you get those punched out before you use the die again. So having a craft pick like this is really great. I'm using a few different colors of Nouveau shimmer powders. I've got Solar Flare and Cherry Bomb on this one, and I'm wetting my watercolor paper so it's nice and wet. I'm just using a wide paintbrush for that. By the way, the watercolor paper I'm using today is Strathmore Cold Press, and I've taped that down to a hard board so that as I work on my project and it dries, that it will dry completely flat. I put on a little bit of powder and then sprayed it with my Distress sprayer. And this just adds quite a bit of water to the surface of my watercolor paper and really gets that powder moving. The pigments are activated, it starts moving around. I'm tipping the board. That's why it's a great idea to have your watercolor paper taped down to something that you can pick up and move around, because then you can manipulate the water that's on the surface of the paper and really get all of those colors moving. I added some more yellow over on the side because everything started turning orange and it was kind of overwhelming, all of the colors. And this area right in the center, this vertical area, it was a valley that the watercolor paper was creating. And I didn't like how it was accentuating all that orange. So I did sop that up with a paper towel. And then I brought in more of that Cherry Bomb color. And I'm using my heat tool to really move that color around and also stop it from spreading, because as it dries, it will stop moving. So now I've got this really pretty shimmery background. The shimmer powders, like their name implies, leave behind a pearlescent sheen, and it's a little bit hard to see in video or even in a picture, but believe me, it's beautiful in person. So I'm trimming down this watercolor piece so that it is 6.5 inches wide by 4.5 inches tall. And I'm going to be gluing that gold mom die directly onto my watercolor paper. I'm using some Gina K Connect glue. I'm just holding that die cut with some tweezers while I get it positioned perfectly over the top of this watercolor background. So here's a tip for you when you use this die. After you have adhered the outline of the die, you're going to need to do something about the interior of that letter O, because it's completely blank and you need to put in the outline from the die cut. So the way you can do this is put in the positive area or the letter, and then you can puzzle piece the outline area for the O right on the inside. This makes sure that you have perfect placement and you don't have to question or wonder if you have everything in the right spot. So I'll just lift up that interior piece, take that out of that puzzle piece area, and then I'm left behind with the interior of the O adhered perfectly. For the card base, I'm going to be creating a 5x7 card out of some Simon Says Stamp Fog cardstock. So I scored that at 5 inches, and then I put quite a bit of foam tape on the back of this watercolor background and then put it directly onto the card base. I'm using the Tiny Words Encouragement stamp set to stamp a small little banner strip and a greeting. going to be stamping it and embossing it with white heat embossing powder. So I'm first prepping this cardstock with an anti-static powder tool and then stamping my greeting in some Versamark ink. By the way, this cardstock is from Hero Arts. This is Hero Hue's premium cardstock in the color Plum. Using some white embossing powder from Burtis Monroe, and then using my heat tool to heat set that. Use my scissors to trim it down into a really small little banner shape, and then I put some foam adhesive on the back. So I'll use my tweezers to position this just over the top, and I also used a T-square ruler to make sure I have it on completely straight. That's just going to help me get that on there perfectly. So there is the first card all complete and finished. I'm going to move on to the second card and do another background using those Nouveau shimmer powders. This is going to go behind my gold letters. So this time I'm using a different color that it's kind of really interesting. It's called Violet Brocade, and it's got pinks and blues. It's really, really cool. It looks like fireworks when you put it down onto a wet surface. You're going to see that it starts spreading with all that water. It looks so cool. And I didn't want it to have quite this obvious of a pattern from where the powder was dropped onto the watercolor paper. So I did add more water on top, and I picked up that hardboard and really started moving things around. You can see the shimmer in this when I turn it in the light really a lot. So the areas where the powder wasn't spreading out enough, I used the tip of my brush to kind of move that around, trying to get those colors really dispersing. I'm going to use my heat tool to manipulate the color where it's flowing. And once I have that dry, I'm going to come in with a wet paintbrush and just kind of go over those areas again. And it spreads out the color. It reactivates those areas where there was a little bit more of that shimmer powder. And it gives me a really, really cool background. I love that there's like kind of magenta pink shades popping through, and then you've got purple and kind of a navy blue color. It's a really interesting way to get a watercolor background. So I'm going to use my distress sprayer to spray water into the palm of my hand. Then I'll pick up that water with a paper towel, and wherever that water was on the paper, it reactivates the color underneath, and then I can pull it up, and I get a really cool kind of like water droplet effect. This is one of my favorite techniques to use with watercolors. So I trimmed that down to be 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, put some adhesive on the back. I used some Tombow Extreme adhesive, and then put that directly down onto a white card base. This card base is made out of some Neenah Solar White 110-pound cardstock. So these letters are the pieces that were left over from the die cut I used on the first card, and I'm going to use just the letters. So I put some really thin strip adhesive on the back of the letters, put those on the card, and then I stamped another greeting from that same stamp set and put that over top. So here are the first two cards. I think they look really great, really fun watercolor backgrounds with gold foil. So the last two cards are really, really simple. I'm going to walk you through these as well. The first one is a shaker card, and I want this die positioned perfectly on the front of my card. So I'm going to add some guidelines on my die. The first thing I'm doing is taking some tape, and I'm lining it up right across the top of that mom, and then this one I'm lining up across the bottom. Then I'm going to flip that die over, and I'm going to use a ruler and also a Sharpie marker, or you can use any marker that writes on slick surfaces. I'm just using a green Sharpie because that's what I had on hand. And I'm using a ruler, and I'm going along the top edge of that tape, and then I'm going to rotate the die, and I can draw a line on the bottom edge. This is so that when I position this die on my cardstock before I run it through my die cutting machine, this makes sure that it's completely straight, so I don't have the mom die cutting out at a strange angle. It'll make more sense when I start going here. Okay, so I'm using the lines on the back of my die to get these positioned just right, and this is going to make sure that my words are perfect and in line. This is a great way to just give yourself some guidelines before you die cut. I'm using some micro pour tape to hold this down to the cardstock, and this is some fog cardstock. This is the same color of cardstock I used for my card base for that very first card that I showed you guys. So I ran that through my die cutting machine, and then I also ran it through using some white cardstock. This is some Neenah Classic Crest Solar White cardstock. So now I've got this cut twice, once out of a very light gray color and one out of the white. For the gray one, I'm going to flip this over so that I'm working on the back side, and I'm going to put down some clear window plastic or some acetate. This is going to be the front window of my shaker card. So I'm using some Ranger Multimedia Matte Adhesive to adhere this. You could also use that same Gina K Connect glue that I used on the first card. This is just another adhesive option. So now I have that window plastic cut down to just the perfect size, and I'm placing that over the top. I'm going to run my fingertips over the top of this, make sure it's adhered all the way down and that it's not going to peel up. I then put dots of adhesive on the white die cut, and I flip this over and then puzzle piece this right in there. I think people call this technique die cut inlaying, when you inlay another color inside where the die was cut. So I'm just putting that down on that area, making sure it's nice and tight and all the way flat. And then similar to what I did on the first card, I used the middle of the O for placement while I placed the outline of the O on the inside. And I can just lift out that O and I have everything in the right position. So to build my shaker area, I'm going to double up on my foam adhesive. So I've got some foam tape here. I've folded it over on itself to double it up. And then I cut it into a very, very thin strip. That's because if you notice around the outside of the die cut, there isn't a whole lot of space between the die cut and the edge of the card. So I wanted to make sure I had a very thin line of foam. And I removed both of the backing sheets or the release papers on the foam so that I was able to manipulate it around those corners. That just makes it a little bit easier so you don't have to keep cutting the foam for every single corner. So I put some additional foam in those corners, and then I'm going to be using the Paint Box Sequins Mix from Little Things from Lucy's Cards. And I'm putting quite a bit in here because I want it to be nice and colorful. And then I'm going to take the same color of cardstock I was using before, which is Plum from Hero Arts. I've made a card base out of that, and I lined it up with my shaker area and just pressed it down. So now I have it on a card front. There's a little extra cardstock hanging out on a couple sides, so I did use a ruler and a craft knife just to even those up and make sure that it's perfectly spaced on there. So I'm not going to add a second greeting on this card. It's so busy with all of those sequins. So I'm going to leave it just like this. Okay, so for my last card, this one is super simple and easy, and I'm going to do a little bit of die cut surgery, and I'm going to take off all of those flowers on the outside of this mom. So if you'll notice that you kind of have to fill in the gaps. You have to cut from one line to the next and kind of just trim off all of those flowers. But if you want a really clean die cut without the flowers, this is one way to get it. If you want to, you could use a craft knife or an X-Acto knife and a ruler and cut these all off at the same time. But I found I had a little bit more precision and it was a little bit closer to right on that edge if I used some scissors. I did try it with a craft knife and I thought scissors was just a little bit easier. So I have that all cut down, and then you're actually left with these strips of flowers, which you could use on another card. I think that would be really cool coming up from a border edge or something like that. So I'm taking that same color of fog cardstock, and I'm going to adhere this on this card base. I'm using my T-square ruler, and I'm going to draw a line so that I know exactly where I'm going to be adhering this die cut. So I drew that line with a pencil. Then I'm using that same Ranger Multimedia Matte Adhesive on the back of this thin outline die cut, and then I'll use my tweezers to get that on there just right. And like I did before on the other cards, I'm going to place that O on the inside. That's going to give me the perfect placement for the interior piece of the letter O. The only thing I'm going to do to finish off this card is add a little tiny banner greeting over the top. I really love the simplicity of this card. So before I do that, I'm just going to erase those pencil lines. I'm using this itty bitty pencil eraser. It's kind of like a mechanical pencil, but with an eraser, and that's from Tombow. So I'm cutting off some little banner edges on the ends of this little tiny strip. And the way I do that, you'll see here in a minute, I'm going to show the other end, is I do a cut going up to the center, and then I can connect the corners with the top of that cut. And that makes it so I have a perfect banner end on this little narrow strip. Put some narrow adhesive on the back of this. This is some more of that Darice very thin narrow strip adhesive I use on the back of the letters in the second card. and then I place that onto the card front. So those are all of the cards today. I hope that gives you some different ideas to use when you're working with the Outline Floral Mom Die. Thanks so much for watching today. I'll be back very soon with another card video for SimonsTheStamp.com.